Alright guys, so video 2, explain the 4 major river valley civilizations. So most of the world's early great civilizations were located in river valleys, and that is because of the fact that they were located near rivers. I know that sounds pretty redundant, but it makes sense because rivers provide a regular supply of water, which is key to survival. Also, the soil around river valleys tends to be full of nutrients, which is good for agriculture and good for farming. Animals tend to follow the water, so that's pretty smart also. And then plants that grew nearby the riverbanks could sometimes be useful for food and other types of maybe even medicinal purposes as well. Eventually, these river valley civilizations will use the waterways as transportation for trade. The first civilization we're going to talk about is Mesopotamia. So Mesopotamia means between the rivers. That's what the name actually translates to, because the territory of Mesopotamia is located between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. The only negative thing about this is that they're surrounded by water, and so sometimes flooding was very unpredictable, and some of these early civilizations even got washed away because of the unpredictable flooding. Some major civilizations in this area are what you can see on the picture there. You can see what looks like mini castles or forts, but 3 of the most important ones are going to be Sumer, Babylon, and Persia. Some major contributions based on civilization are going to be the Sumerians first. They are famous for creating cuneiform, which is an early form of writing. They also created a 12-month calendar and a math system based on the number 60. So you get 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour. A circle has 360 degrees, kind of like the early forms of geometry as well. And then also the construction of ziggurats, which are pyramids, and I'll show you on the next slide. Sumerians also are polytheistic. The word poly means many, so they worship many different gods or deities. Then we get to the Babylonians. Babylonians, or Babylon, might sound familiar because you may have heard it from the Bible. The Babylonians had a famous king named Hammurabi. He felt that his people had to be unified through a code of laws, and so he wrote down this very specific codification of rules that was on display for his people to see. It was called the Code of Hammurabi, and it operated on the principle of an eye for an eye. So you take from me, I take from you. You hurt me, I can hurt you. You build a house, that house collapses, somebody gets hurt or injured, guess what? You or a member of your family gets hurt or injured as well. So worst case scenario usually ended up in death, and as you can see later, obviously an eye for an eye doesn't work. Eventually these both groups will be taken over by neighboring territories. They'll be taken over by the Akkadians first, then the Kassites, then the Hittites, and then the Assyrians. The Hittites and the Assyrians were able to conquer these territories a lot more quickly because they developed the use of iron tools. Yesterday we talked about bronze, today it's about iron. Iron is a lot stronger than bronze, and therefore their weapons are better, and their warriors and their fighters can defeat their enemies a lot quicker and a lot faster. Then you will see those groups eventually also being overthrown by another group called the Chaldeans. Their king, Nebuchadnezzar, would eventually try and rebuild Babylon. He would even build this huge giant temple, but it would eventually also fall to Persia as well. So in the picture you guys can see the tablets of the Code of Hammurabi. This is an actual artifact that was left behind, and we discovered it, or people discovered it. It looks small in the picture, but it's actually probably about 12 feet tall, so it's pretty large. Then you can see Hammurabi depicted in art as well. Hammurabi was a warrior king, so therefore he's obviously depicted in battle. And then you have a picture of a ziggurat. So a ziggurat is not like your typical pyramid. It is not what we would think normally, like, the pointy Egyptian kind. It is more square, it is more flat. And we made the joke in class about the guy from Ancient Aliens, because the flat surface made a good space for the aliens to land. We don't really know that for sure. But what we do know is that the Sumerians were some pretty good builders, because if you look at the next one, it's actually a photograph of a surviving ziggurat that's still there today. So banged up job for architecture. Egypt. Egypt was located by the Nile River. They did have predictable flooding, which is makes their life a lot easier, because they could tell when the river was going to flood, and they could make allowances for that. It was ruled by pharaohs or kings. They were also polytheistic. They did believe that there was an afterlife, so there was something after even people died, which is why they mummified their dead. They valued things that were of luxury to them: gold, spices, other riches, jewels, gemstones, and even sometimes people. And we know that because they were buried with them in these very, very large tombs. Some major contributions in terms of arts and sciences include obelisks, pyramids, hieroglyphics, which is like pictographic writing, and astronomy, so study of the stars. It is important to know that it was marked by 3 different kingdoms: the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdom. The New Kingdom is where they had reached their peak or their highest point of power. Cool thing about the Egyptians is the women in Egypt. So unlike other civilizations, women had a lot of power in this area, in this civilization. So they even had some females who ruled as pharaohs at one point. So Queen Hatshepsut ruled for 22 years in Egypt. During the time that she was in charge, Egypt did experience relative peace, and they had experienced a boost in trade. Then you have another story of Ramses, not the Ramses from the Bible, another Ramses, because there were several of them. But Ramses, the pharaoh, really valued his wife, and he loved her very, very, very much. And we know this because he would often represent Queen Nefertari side by side with him in art. That's a huge sign. So it's kind of like when you make somebody Facebook official, or like you post it on Snap or something and people can see it. Kind of similar to that, because what it does is that most pharaohs, when they would present themselves or show pictures of themselves, they were in the front, they looked like they were 7 or 8 feet tall. Everybody else, regardless if they were men or women, were in the back, and they were like kind of really small, miniature looking, because the pharaohs really wanted to project how powerful they were. The fact that Nefertari appears side by side next to Ramses in a lot of this art is important, because he's trying to show you that she is his equal, and he wanted it shown that way. So he made an emphasis to show that to his people as well, and for that to be remembered through all history as well. Women could also buy, sell, and inherit property, unlike Sumeria. In Sumeria, women were the property. You belonged to your husbands, you belonged to your fathers, you belonged to the eldest male member of your family, and you had no say in who you married at all. In Egypt, you had way more rights. Women could even dissolve marriages if they felt that under certain circumstances the situation didn't benefit them. Women were given titles as birth givers, life givers, and sometimes the societies were even matrilineal. Instead of being patriarchal, where the men are in charge, the women necessarily weren't in charge, but there was more of an emphasis put on them, because it was really hard to deny who your mother was, because your mother physically has to give birth to you. But in terms of back then, it could be hard to question paternity, who your father was, because that wasn't a guarantee. And so sometimes there was much more of an emphasis put on the children of women versus the children of men, because they couldn't determine or establish 100% paternity at the time. So the Great Pyramids of Egypt, shown in the top left corner, they're actually big giant tombs. The pharaohs were put into these tombs with their jewels, sometimes their slaves and their wives, things that they valued in this life because they believed the afterlife they could take stuff with them. The bottom one is the Sphinx. We see it in Aladdin, where they're flying by on the magic carpet. And the other one in the middle is, like I mentioned, the story of Ramses and Nefertari. So see, she is equal to him, and that is there for everyone and for all to see for all of eternity. The last picture is the obelisk. The obelisk, they actually stole from the Aksum civilization, also located in Africa. But the Egyptians made it more popular, so it becomes associated with Egyptian history. We actually saw one. The Washington Monument in Washington is an obelisk. And some reasons why the Egyptians fell. So Egypt will grow too big too quickly, and we also will see a problem later with slavery. We'll get to that when we get to the biblical portion and the biblical conflicts surrounding the story of Egypt and Moses and the pharaohs and things like that. But they do fall to some other neighboring civilizations, the Assyrians, the Persians. At one point they're occupied by the Greeks, and then eventually they're even taken over by the Romans completely. The Indus River Valley civilization is a little bit different because compared to the other two, they had much more limited contact with the outside world. To the north of them, they're surrounded by mountains, and also to the west of them, they're surrounded by mountains. The only area or territory where you can reach the Indus River Valley is through the Khyber Pass, where the Hindu Kush Mountains are. This area provided a connection to the outside world, and it would eventually lead to a trade route. Two major cities in this area are Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. We know that these cities were very well planned out, very well thought out, really sharp architecture and planning from some of these early engineers, and they had a very strong central government that was usually led by a ruler that was the priest/king. So they combined religion and theology, religion and government as well. Their farmers grew cotton. Their artisans made cloth, which is important for trade. They would trade with Mesopotamia. The Mesopotamians had not figured out how to do this process yet, so it was essential for them to travel to get those goods they needed to get. Around 1900 BCE, for some reason, people in the Indus River Valley pretty much just disappeared, and we don't really know why. Historians haven't been able to explain that fully yet. And then we will not see another civilization pop up until about 400 years later with the arrival of the Aryans in about 1500 BCE. The Aryans are nomads that came from the Caucasus Mountains near the Black and the Caspian Sea. I'll show you where that is on a map right now, but it's pretty much way to the north. They migrated down south. They had horses. They used advanced weaponry. They would eventually take over the Indus River Valley, and they would settle there. So they go from being nomads to being settlers. Two important things to remember is that they contributed to eventually the Indian/Hindu culture. They brought with them the ideas of reincarnation, which is being reborn. That would get incorporated into the Vedas, the scriptures of Hinduism, and the basis of Hinduism itself. Then we also see the social structures. They had three very clear groups. You had the warriors, then you had the priests, and then you had the peasants. That will later get changed over time, and it will become the basis, but for the caste system in India. They will change, and like I said, you'll have four groups in the caste system. They will swap the warriors and the priests, with the priests being on top, then the warriors, then merchants, which is a new group that gets added, and then lastly the peasants. The pictures that you guys see there are the remnants and the leftovers of what Harappa would have looked like today. So just things that are left behind. And the bottom picture is more of the city, what it would have looked like back then historically. So again, very well planned out, the homes, the areas, the territories, streets, neighborhoods, villages, and things like that. And then the Caucasus Mountains, like I mentioned, it's pretty much almost reaching towards the northern parts of Russia. And so very far north for them to travel all the way down south, but eventually they did travel and they settled. Lastly, you get to the Huang He. The Huang He, or the Yellow River Valley civilization, was known for its trade. They didn't trade much with the outside world, but they did trade a lot with each other. So the map that you guys see there and all the little red dots are all these trade cities that were important all along the Yellow River. The first dynasty of China is the Shang dynasty. So remember the song? Shang Zhu Qin Han, Sang Zhu Qin Han, Sweet Tang Song. You get it, okay. Shangs are first. They controlled large parts of northern China. They had a very strong military. They used chariots. Their workers built walls around the towns, around the cities, around the river, and they had very limited contact with the rest of the world. However, they did still manage to somehow trade with Mesopotamia. We know that the Huang He civilization also had an ethnocentric attitude, which means they viewed themselves as superior to everyone else. They legit named their civilization all under heaven, so they thought they were it, essentially. They had a reason to believe some of those things. So they were very accomplished bronze workers. They developed the spoke wheel. They were experts in terms of pottery and silk, which would be really important later because no one would figure out silk for thousands of years. And they also created a decimal system and a very highly accurate calendar. The family system was pretty similar to almost all the other civilizations, except that in the Huang He civilization, the household was focused on multiple generations of the same family. So not just the immediate family, but also the extended family as well. And this was super 100% patriarchal. No questions asked. Men were always in charge. The Shang religion held that gods controlled all aspects of people's lives. People could call on their ancestor spirits to act as advocates or intercede for them on their behalf for the gods. So kind of similar to where the Catholics pray to saints. You want someone to help or pray for you, to reach out to you because they feel like those people are closer to God, and therefore it's kind of the same thing. Around 1100 BCE, the Shang were overtaken by the Zhou. The Zhou would rule China for the next 900 years, which in terms of Chinese dynasties is a really, really long time. They pretty much kept a lot of the same traditions and beliefs as Shang China. They just added some new ones. So they would establish the Mandate of Heaven. The Mandate of Heaven basically says that the Zhou are in charge because the gods want them to be in charge. And if the Zhou are just and right and good rulers, they will continue to be in charge. So it's almost a way to legitimize their power for staying in control. They will eventually also develop a feudal system, and they created bureaucracies, which are small centers of government that micromanage other groups of the government, and it would remain popular in China for the next couple thousands of years. Some important things to remember is that a lot of the things they had in common. So agriculture, written language, metals, growth of cities, spread of influence through trade and conquest. Also, some of the reasons they fell apart are the same too. They got too big too quickly, they would go to war with others, and then bad things could happen. The last slide is your exit ticket, and so make sure you answer both of them. You can answer them on a separate answer document and submit them via Classroom. I hope you guys had fun. See you guys tomorrow. Bye.